Well, good morning again, everybody. May I say happy Thursday, and can I welcome you all to the Sustainability Revolution. Today is day 3 of the Sustainability Revolution, and we are delighted to be joined by so many people that I can see steadily coming in through the system right now. And can I start first and foremost by saying what a week it has been for us in Business in the Community Ireland. And as we said on Tuesday, this is only the beginning. First and foremost, I want to take a moment to thank the 9 sponsors of this series of essential conversations, as we've called them. I'd like to take a moment to name them because they have been very supportive of us during this whole period. Abbott, BT, Gas Networks Ireland, IBM, Johnson & Johnson, KBC Bank, Musgrave, Permanent TSB, and Veolia. And before today finishes, I will let you know about some of the further work that we're going to be doing with these companies. As always, just some very short note of housekeeping, just so everybody knows this is being recorded. Links will be shared. In the bottom of the screen, there's a chat. The chat is not functioning, and that's because any questions, comments, suggestions, technical challenges that you're facing, or anything you would like to share with us, please use the Q&A box. My colleague Linda Sullivan is on the other side of the Q&A box, and she will be managing any concerns that you might have. Avid social media active people, hashtag SustRev21, and as you know, we are at BITC Ireland. Okay, so today is the third day, and you have the agenda in front of you. And as you can see, today is about a different type of conversation. So I'm very much looking forward to this, because sometimes we can be criticized for just being too navel gazing and just talking amongst ourselves. And this is one of the issues we discussed on Tuesday about mainstreaming the conversation on sustainability. So today we're going to be talking about youth, consumerism, activism, and the media. So I'm very excited about the 3 speakers that are going to be joining us during the next 60 minutes or so, and I'll be bringing them on as we go along. Let me do a very brief recap of where we are, what we have discussed on Tuesday and yesterday. So we started the conversation talking about some of the major challenges that are coming in front of us. And while we're all exhausted and quite taken aback by the challenge of the pandemic, there's some other major challenges ahead of us. We spoke about growing inequality in our society, and this is not just an Ireland problem. This is a global problem, and I hope that we'll be drawing on some of that global expertise of our speakers to talk about that. We spoke about the nature breakdown. We spoke about the climate crisis, and all of that is mounting pressure towards business. We even spoke about this notion of, is capitalism broken and it needs to be fixed, and how are we going to fix capitalism? So substantial challenges, and we started Tuesday talking to 5 CEOs, and a note of optimism came quite loud and clear from the CEOs, and they said we need to stand for our purpose, we need to stand for our values, and we need to face these challenges, and we need to remind ourselves that this is possible. Then on yesterday, we continued the conversation, and we got some in-depth dialogue with the change makers within 2 of our member companies. And that was a very, very exciting conversation, because we could see how sustainability is now getting more and more relevant, impactful, strategic, and very much embedded within the core of business operations. And if there was any doubt of that, we had a super dialogue around sustainable procurement and modern slavery. And if that didn't really put us back into understanding the true challenge ahead of us, I don't know what else will. But it was really impactful, and it really helped us understand that now it's the time for more change to come. We asked all our speakers, do we need a revolution, or what else do we need? Katrina Fitzsimons said it very well yesterday. Maybe it's somewhere between the evolution and the revolution is the transformation. But anyway, let's wait for that and see where that's going to take us. So that's what the conversation has been so far. And as I said, we need to bring different voices. So before we go into our first discussion, I just want to tell everybody about Business in the Community Ireland, for those of you who have not heard of us. And I'll summarize it in one line. And it's very much about the power of business. And there you can see the 115 or more companies that are our business. And it's the power of business to make change happen on sustainability. For the last 21 years, we have been working with these companies to create an ecosystem and a space for business to further look at their environmental, social, and governance dimensions and helping them individually and collectively on that transformation. Okay, so now is the time. Let's go to our first exciting conversation of the morning. So I'm delighted to invite Jon Williams, Managing Director of News and Current Affairs at RTE, to join us. And hi, Jon.
Hello, Thomas. Hi.
How are you doing this morning?
Good, good. Very happy to see RT's logo there among the members of Business in the Community Ireland.
There you go. So we box one ticked. I'm not going to do a big introduction to our speaker this morning, but I just want to tell you that Jon has, for nearly 5 years, being the Managing Director of News and Current Affairs at RTE. And previous roles to that would include BBC World News Editor, BBC 6 O'Clock News Deputy Editor, BBC UK News Editor, and Managing Editor International News at ABC in New York. And something you probably won't know about Jon is that some of his work, which has included coverage of some of the most dramatic fundamental shifts in world politics and society, gave him a BAFTA award for the coverage of the July 7th, 2005 bombings in the London and transport system. So Jon, thanks so much for joining us, and let's go straight into the conversation. I guess some of the challenges, you know, we're going to talk about the role of the media, and particularly the role of the media when it comes to this whole sustainability conversation. And it feels that for a while it was very easy to talk about this, and now we realize it's more complex. There's misleading statements. There's statements that need to be corroborated by evidence. It's difficult to talk about things like climate change because there's so much fact behind it, but also there's a lot of misinformation. So how are you seeing this whole conversation on sustainability and the misinformation that keeps on growing? How do we deal with this, I guess?
Well, in many ways, climate change is just like every other aspect of the news. There are nefarious actors who want to put across their own perspectives and engage in disinformation to do so. The job of a journalist is to check, and check again. And it is in the DNA of people at RT News to check facts and to report facts. And fact-based journalism is it was not only the antidote to the COVID pandemic, it is the antidote to the tsunami of lies that are told around climate change. Now, I'll be honest with you, climate change and science generally is a trickier area for journalists. I'm not a scientist, I'm a arts graduate, and most of us are arts graduates, and scientists sort of speak a different language. But we have a great team, and the science community in Ireland is incredibly generous with their time and with their insights. So that's the way that we navigate our way through the maze of misinformation.
Absolutely, and I think in that sense the the role of the media, I think there's a key element around trust, isn't it, when it comes to this? I think there was a time where it was very clear cut who was the media or where was the information coming. Now, if we think about it, it's coming from everywhere. But I think this whole element of trust, and it becomes even more fundamental for everything you do.
Trust is the key metric for us, really, because without trust, we have nothing. So every year, the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at Oxford University does a global survey of the news industry, and it looks at 43 jurisdictions. Ireland is one of them. And when the report came out in June, I'm proud to say that RTE was again the most trusted source of news and current affairs in Ireland. But we don't take that for granted because, like so many businesses, reputations are hard won and are easily lost. And for us, every story that we broadcast every day is a potential problem for us if we get it wrong. And so that's why we check and check again that actually what we're reporting is accurate.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it puts even more responsibility on your shoulders, without a doubt, as the person leading on that front. Can I talk to you then for a second about climate change, because obviously that keeps on coming as the one topic of concern, and later in the conversation with Jane and Adam, we'll be talking about youth, and we know how young people feel about climate change. So there were critical voices at some point around whether RT was doing enough or not when it came to this space, and I've read some of your own reflections on this, and a number of issues coming all at the same time. What has been the journey for you and your team when it comes to understanding your role on this climate agenda, and where do you see it going forward?
Well, I'm going to give you a little exclusive, but you'll have to wait.
Keep quiet.
For that. Look, like any business, we are balancing different wants and needs and trying to juggle priorities. And during the pandemic, it really was all hands to the pump. We did not have the luxury of saying to people, "Okay, go home and work from home." Because we have to get the programs out. The 6-1 has to be presented from the studio. Morning Island has to be presented from the studio. And so throughout all of that, running a 24/7 operation around COVID was incredibly tough. And it meant that George Lee, who is the environment and science correspondent, had to park his environment pretty much for 18 months. Which was unfortunate, and it's not George's fault. If there is fault, it is mine. But the truth is that the stories that you read about RT's financial challenges are true, and we do not have enough money to employ a separate science correspondent and an environment correspondent. And so for You mentioned RT on climate 2 years ago, and we did this sort of huge week of coverage, culminated in a youth assembly coinciding with the 100th anniversary of the first sitting of the first Doyle. And we had so many ambitions that we wanted to realize in 2020. And then, like so many other people, all of our business plans just went, and we had to park them. Now, as we come out of COVID, we are dusting them off again. And today I'm announcing that George is going to focus solely on the environment brief going forward, and we will reassign the science brief to somebody else. Separately, I've appointed an executive producer to marshal all of our climate coverage across news and current affairs. And once a quarter, there will be a special edition of Primetime looking at climate change and looking at the latest trends. And we will build out from that across all of the programs and platforms for RT News and current affairs. And of course, it all begins with the COP26, the Conference of the Parties in Glasgow in less than a month's time. And both Morning Island and the news at Morning Island and the sixth one will be there on the opening day. Primetime and Noot will go towards the end, and George will lead our reporting of that event. So, it can be uncomfortable sometimes to be in the public eye, and particularly when people think that you have got it wrong. We don't pretend to have a monopoly of wisdom, and I subscribe to the view that if somebody says you've got it wrong, investigate, and if you have got it wrong, put your hand up and move on. And I hope that's what we've tried to do. But we are certainly supersizing our coverage of climate change going forward, because, as you say, there is no doubt that for younger audiences, it is an area that they are particularly interested in.
Yeah, no, without a doubt, and obviously great to see all of those sneaky previews that you're sharing with us this morning, and we'll certainly be looking forward to that, and to whatever degree we can share some of the stories of what the business community is doing in relation to the challenge of climate.
You talked about there being opportunities as well, and the optimism that characterized the first day of the conference. And I do think it's really important that we go into this not despairing and not with a sense of we can't change things. The IPCC is clear that we can change things, and we still do have time to make sure that we don't damage the planet irreparably, but we need to act quickly. And so the onus is on us as a public service broadcaster to actually explain what's going on in Glasgow, but also show people how they can help themselves and how they can help the planet. So it's that combination of both insight and explanation, but also being positive about it and not fatalistic. Because I think if we're fatalistic, then truly people will turn off, and that's not in our commercial interest, but it's also actually not in the interests of the planet in terms of climate change.
No, without a doubt, and we need to give people hope and also a sense of the journey ahead, because it is at the end of the day behavioral change what we need, and we need it from everybody. And I think that's where you play a fantastic role, because it is informing us and it's modeling some of the challenges that are coming ahead. But if I stay with business for a second, Jon, because many of the companies that we work with are really struggling to tell the story of what they're doing when it comes to this journey, and even explaining net zero or net positive or whatever expression keeps on coming. I wonder if there's anything that, from your perspective, companies need to be doing differently or need to be emphasizing more when it comes to telling this journey, because I was quoting on Tuesday another statistic, which was something around 40% of green claims from business in the UK were considered misleading. So clearly there's on purpose or not, but there's a lot of confusion out there. So I'm sure you see a lot of companies trying to tell the story. Yeah. What would you like to see more?
Well, part of me thinks that actually people shouldn't be looking to get rewards for doing this. This is what is now expected, and actually failure to comply is a problem in itself. So I actually think it matters not really what I think, it matters what the audience thinks. And we know that the audience have priced in all of the environmental initiatives that business are taking, because that's what they have to do. That is what being a constructive partner in a modern economy means. And so all of the waving the green credentials, you might actually say it's what people expect. So don't necessarily expect to get brownie points just for saying that you are being environmentally friendly. You have to be, and failure to do so could cost you very significantly.
Yeah, without a doubt, and I think we always talk about facts and figures. Back to your initial comment around the role of the journalist, because it's more and more the need to back with evidence what companies are doing. For us, sustainability, John, it also covers the whole social and the social impact end. And I think that's another major challenge. And earlier in the year, we published some further research, and we're looking at statistics such as a Black person is 6 times less likely to be employed than anybody else in this country. There was another piece of research around traveler employment, and I think everybody knows how dire the statistics are, something around 80% unemployment around the members of the traveler community. So again, you need to reflect some of those realities through your programming. Is there a further role there, or is there an enhancing of the role of RTE when it comes not just to reflecting, but to helping us make a think about what the talent that's been left behind? I'm sure your journalists are reporting about skill shortages at every single business everywhere, yet a big part of our society is unemployed.
Well, look, Thomas, you and I are part of the 19% of people in Ireland who were not born in Ireland. And Ireland is a hugely diverse country. And every one of those people is obliged by law to pay the television license fee. And so they are entitled to see their island reflected back on their television screen. So, we have an obligation to challenge stereotypes, and not just to portray an island that is perhaps a little comfortable and familiar to the majority of people who are Irish and were born here. But we also then have to reach out and find ways of engaging those other communities. And the truth is that we have not done enough. And we are, like so many businesses, I imagine, we are making progress, but it is not fast enough. It is not enough on its own, and it is hard work, because we need to actually find culture carriers. We need to find ambassadors and role models that people can aspire to be. I have a picture of Keelan Shanley in my office. Keelan died just under 2 years ago, and when I asked Keelan and Katrina to take over as the co-anchors of the 6-1 News, Keelan said to me, "If you can see it, you can be it." And the thing that she was most proud about was that actually, young girls or teenagers growing up would not necessarily have the stereotype that it had to be a man or a woman. That if you were good enough, you could get there. And that needs to be our gold standard, whatever ethnic group or race or creed or religion people come from. And it might sound a bit silly, the guy from Spain and the guy from Britain having this conversation about diversity in a modern Ireland, but it is absolutely essential. And our audience expects it, and they are urging us to go faster.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that was a very nice memory and analogy. So I really appreciate that. And you're just exposing the challenge that's ahead. And I guess common challenge for you and for us, which is looking at how through employment and making visible that employment, we can get more of that inclusion that we much need. Final question, John. coming back to the coverage and how do we tell that story around sustainability. And I was asking one of the CEOs on Tuesday about how do we make this conversation more mainstream. How do we get more of the story of what business is doing? And I'm thinking, we announce a company investing in Ireland. Happy days. We'll see what happens today with corporation tax. But anyway, we're very hopeful. And we talk about job creation. We talk about injection into the economy. But perhaps sometimes we don't necessarily talk about, well, they're going to bring best-in-class environmental practices, or they're going to come with a strong ethos of diversity. And that's kind of a very tiny example. But I wonder if you have any advice there on how we can get more of this conversation mainstream. Is it making the message simpler, or what it is?
Well, I think the conversation that we've had in our business is that every interview that we do about any subject, there probably needs to be a sustainability question in the interview. And so whether it's about the National Development Plan, whether it's around the corporation, the expected rise in corporation tax this afternoon, all of that, you look at the situation in terms of rents in Dublin. In part, that rise in rents is caused by inward foreign investment and people coming in and displacing people at the bottom, and a increasing number of people chasing a fixed housing stock. There are questions about whether that is sustainability applies to that as well. So I think the one thing I would say is in every conversation there probably ought to be a sustainability moment, and whatever it is, because whether it's about supply chain, whether it's about product launch, it is so front and center, and it is it is very clear that our audience, the voters, the consumers, they put this at the top of their agenda, and they want to see progress, and all of us have got an obligation to actually make sure that we deliver that, and that we hold those responsible to account for delivering it.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's the key point also in terms of holding everybody accountable for those,
including us. Yeah?
Fair enough. Jon, you might give me one more minute. There's somebody from the audience is asking about where there will be an agriculture correspondent, or the agriculture portfolio in RTE.
Yep.
If you can give us a final sneaky preview before we let you go.
So earlier this summer, we began a strategic review of everything that we did, just to make sure that we had the right briefs, that we had the right within a limited pot of money, you have to make choices. And so, pending the outcome of that review, we just paused the hiring of a number of roles, just to make sure that actually we wanted to validate our instincts, and but there will be the agriculture brief is a very important brief, and there will be a new agriculture correspondent, and I imagine that they will be in post before Christmas.
Super. So then let's watch this space. Jon Williams, thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you this morning, and looking forward to seeing more of that transformation happening in RT as well. Thank you, Jon.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, so that was part one, and I hope that was a very interesting and useful conversation in terms of setting the foundations in terms of the medium where that role is evolving, and the interaction with business on sustainability. So the second conversation is going to turn towards activism, consumerism, youth, and also something that it's common about my two speakers in this second panel is that they're both founders and entrepreneurs, and I think that's very exciting. So delighted to welcome Jane McDade, the founder and head of creative innovation at Think House, and Adam Harris, the founder and CEO of AsIAm. So great to see you both this morning. How are you all?
Great, thank you. It's great to be here.
Great to be here. Thanks a million for having me.
Pleasure. Okay, well then let's go straight into it, because as we said, today has to be about different voices and different conversations when it comes to this whole sustainability, and reminding everybody sustainability is very wide, and it's not just about the climate dimension. Adam, I might start with you. I've met you before, and I've seen the evolution of your organization. So how would you define AsIAm? I mean, if I read from your website, it's a movement for change for the autism community, but clearly it's this role has evolved over time. And when you think about an organization that's trying to make change happen, where do you see that going? I see you sometimes you're commenting on what's happening or not happening, supports or no supports, you're partnering with business, you're providing research. Where do you see your own role as an organization evolving?
I have to say, I've been thinking a lot about this question since you emailed it to me. And I think it's interesting, because maybe it kind of, I think, captures, in a sense, sometimes I think where we can all do better, because I think sometimes we think we have to be one or other of those things. So we have to be somebody who challenges, or we have to be somebody who works in partnership. We have to be an organization that wants fundamental change, or we have to be an organization that accepts change by degrees. I think all of those things are important. You know, I think an organization that wants to bring about change, that requires a massive societal shift. It's a very, very complex process, and there's no one lever or one tool, I think, that brings that about. So I think those of us, you know, involved in advocacy have a really an obligation to engage with all stakeholders, to meet stakeholders where they're at, and to try and work in partnership. I think perhaps one of the great lessons, I think, for many of us in advocacy, and we're I think learning this all the time, is we have to make sure that we don't end up speaking in an echo chamber. It's very, very easy to spend your days speaking to the converted, but that won't actually get us to where we need to be. I think AsIAm is an interesting organization in this space, in the sense that I guess when AsIAm was set up, it was about changing how autism is understood and how it is spoken about. And I guess I grew up in an Ireland where, when we talked about autism or disability, it was all about changing the person. It was all about nearly saying, you're wrong and you need to be more like everybody else. What AsIAm wants to do is build the capacity of autistic people, but actually build a bridge between people who are autistic and people who aren't autistic. And the only way you can build a bridge is to work in collaboration. So that's very much been our working style. I guess when I was kind of thinking about this, I guess it may be the best way I see our organization being is a critical friend, that we're somebody who wants to work in partnership, that we're somebody that wants to acknowledge good change where it's happening. And I think it's really important to say, if we look, for example, in terms of diversity and inclusion, where we are now versus where we were 20 years ago, there has been great progress made. And it's important that that's recognized when it happens, that that's celebrated, that that's acknowledged. I think critically, it's important to co-create. You know, we've had some great examples of that, even with business and the community members. I see Musgrave as a sponsor of the event today, and obviously the work we've done building autism-friendly communities around Ireland. We couldn't create autism-friendly shopping by ourselves, but equally Musgrave couldn't do it without us. It required a coming together, and I think that co-creation is really important. But I think finally, I think what it's about as well is accountability. So I think we have to acknowledge, we have to co-create, but ultimately we have to hold to account as well. And if I just take the employment piece, because I think it's a really interesting example, I think this is an example where business is coming to a key moment, because we're seeing this massive generation of people with disabilities who've gone through mainstream education, aging out of our school system. And yes, there's lots of pockets of good practice on the ground. Yes, there's lots of collaboration happening, but is there enough of a dial shift happening? And I think what business has to think about is, you know, whether business likes it or not, it will have to reflect its customer base. This is in the interest of the business. It's not about actually pitting advocacy and business against each other. This is good for everybody. But businesses deal with competing interests. And I guess it's the job of those of us in advocacy to make sure that the interests of our community don't get lost. And I think if we take climate and employment, and if we nearly look at them, there was a period where climate was about doing the right thing. Now it's about, you must do this. And I think what business has to decide is, does it want to lead and solve this problem in partnership with advocacy? Or do we need to move into the space of regulation and quotas and enforcement?
Fair enough, and thanks for that. I really love this notion of the critical friend, and it's great to see how your movement is evolving. I think it definitely echoes a lot of the thinking in business in the community as well in terms of that role. Jane, let's talk about brands. I mean, you lead a very, very interesting agency. You work with some exciting brands, and I'm curious to see how much of the conversation of this brands is around sustainability. There was a time I remember, well, 20 years ago or so, there was a sustainability expert, and he used to say that the marketing department considered the sustainability department as the sales prevention team. You know, they were like, get as far away from marketing as possible. You have nothing to add to our brands. I guess that has somehow changed. And obviously your agency, Jane, specializes on the youth market. So I'm really interested to see what sort of conversations are you having with those brands around this whole discussion we're having.
Yeah, I think the conversation has changed so much over the last 3 years. And I even think, you know, back to like I was that annoying and irritating voice in the room with so many of our clients. You know, it was the eye roll moment. Jane's here, she is again, asking us and challenging us about the decisions we're making. But obviously that's recognized now as a real value as a partner for the brands and the clients that we work with. I think there's a real mixed response from brands across the board, not just the brands that we work with. They're all at various different stages of their journey. So I think the responsibility of the partner, the agency, is to recognize what stage of the journey that they're at and to work with them through that. And that's really, really, really important, because embarking on a sustainable practice and a sustainable journey for clients, for brands, for organizations can be actually quite scary, can be quite frightening. You have incredibly experienced and accomplished marketeers that have potentially led some of the most disruptive, successful, imaginative campaigns in their own career history. And they find themselves having to relearn all over again, because after the metrics have changed, and the metrics really, really matter when it comes to sustainable practice. Yeah. But I think, in terms of the dichotomy between wanting to live sustainably and the elephant in the room, which is we're existing in a world where there is excessive consumerism, there's a couple of things we have to recognize. Well, firstly, we've had COVID. So we've had a period of reflection. I'm part of the Purpose Disruptors, and we called it the Great Reset. And I know there's other great resets, so the language has been used a lot. But really what that was about, recognizing that this is actually an opportunity in time where we can reflect on everything that's happened over the last 100 years. And indeed, if you even look over the last 200 years, there was 1 billion people in the world 200 years ago. There's now like 7.6 billion people in the world. So it was always going to become a massive problem and challenge for us to face. And this is the time that we're facing it. And I do think COVID has expedited those conversations and that journey. So there's a couple of things, I think, conflicting forces. The force of consumerism, obviously, that all has come about. And the rise of the middle class and people's ability to acquire more stuff, and how this really has become normalized over the last kind of 50 years. And then I think the climate crisis becoming more visible, not just in the last 3 years and the last 5 years, but really over the last 50 years. So those two things are really in conflict with each other. And then we also have the digital transformation that we've all experienced over the last 5, 10, 25, 30 years as well. So all of these conflicting forces are resulting in different things. I think when it comes to young people specifically, they're asking is, what about ism? Well, what about the companies? What about the government? And they're making their voices heard. And I think that the wonderful thing about young people is that they understand that they can make or break a brand. They understand the value of their own voice, and they are changing brands. They are changing organizations. So I think when it comes to brands, some of them are with young people and ahead of young people because they've been listening to young people and they're responding in how they shape their organizations. And some of them are not yet. Young people are ahead of them in terms of their climate literacy or sustainability literacy or diversity and inclusion literacy as well. So I think it's really a question of leadership and intelligence. And what kind of leadership is our brand, does our brand need right now to be able to navigate this new world where we have young consumers that are really asking the big questions, that are really, really literate. You know, they're really entrepreneurial as well. If they can't find the solution, they're often setting up their own organizations, their own businesses, so that they can actually offer a more sustainable solution or locally sourced solution. But I think the really exciting thing here is the speed at which culture is changing. You know, that language that we all are talking about today, you know, net zero, zero waste, climate justice, carbon measurement, and all of that language, which, you know, a couple of years ago was actually quite exotic, which now it's very much within the lexicon of youth audiences. And I think that, combined with lots of other forces, have really woken brands up. And I mean, from my own personal experience, there's a huge appetite for brands to learn, to start from the heart and the core of their organization, and learn up as they did with digital, as they did with social media, all of the other things that we've been very much on the vanguard of, helping them understand and helping them become comfortable within those cultures. They're doing that now, albeit definitely at a different rate, depending on the brand and the organization.
No, that's very interesting. And I guess something that's critical in what you're saying, Jane, is the whole point around facts and figures, back to the conversation with Jon earlier, and being able to tell a story, because something we see ourselves a lot is that this journey to net zero is not as linear and as every day there's one emission, you know, less emissions. It's going to go up and down. It can be complex, and I think that's what then can make some people quite overwhelmed about this journey. And back to young people, they probably feel, you know, that so much is coming at them, and you sometimes wish there would be more young people in conversations like this when we try to see how business feels there is hope, there's optimism, but maybe they're not necessarily transmitting it. So I think that's interesting. But the other point I wanted to touch with you is around, you said it, the excessive consumerism. And are we, if you were to look to the future and use your expertise and your experience to look into the future, do you see the day where we're going to see brands perhaps telling consumers use less of our product? Would that is that the ultimate goal, I guess?
Well, it's not necessarily a goal, it's one solution, and we're already seeing that, Tomas. Okay. We see that with Patagonia, Vivienne Westwood, very much in the fashion world, is waking up at quite a pace. So I think there's a couple of different things that are going to help us reach the goals. As you said, it is a very complex situation. The two biggest influencers are really the investors, you know, when it comes to the big brands and the big organizations, and consumers. So if we look at the investors for a second, we know that green investments are now proving better than non-green investments. So the pressure, therefore, is now coming from investors. And I think there's a group called the Climate Action 100 Plus. And I think there's 615 investors that are part of that. And those investors themselves are responsible for overseeing, I think, trillions of euros worth of global business. So, I mean, there's quite a big pressure, you know, as a result of this. And I see that mounting a lot over the last couple of years, coming from the investors, which we know really works. Whatever change is required in business, if the pressure is coming from the investors and they're seeing positive dividends in return from green investments, that's going to really, really accelerate things. I think that's really hugely positive. And maybe, you know, like, it wasn't really until I started understanding and reading up a lot more on that kind of investor economy, I started to really relax, like, gosh, there is a lot happening here, you know, and there's a lot of positive pressures being put on businesses. The other positive pressure is obviously coming from consumers, and we see and we hear and we feel that all of the time. And I never counted calories. I'm not a calorie counter, but a lot of people do, and a lot of people understand calorie counting, and they will understand carbon counting to the exact same level as they understand that. Brands know that, companies know that. We've got to be able to deliver on that as well. And I think in terms of the the ultimate goal is really to find a way where, you know, that it's not so much always about selling, it's about that circular economy, it's about creating opportunity where we're all actually potentially buying and selling. You know, if you look at the energy sector, for example, where with solar energy, I can have, you know, my excess energy can go back onto the grid. So it's really looking at a whole new way of doing business where brands aren't necessarily now just in the game of product selling. They're actually in the services game as well, because it's often about how can we reuse that, or what happens to this, instead of it, you know, a linear economy where you buy something, you use it once and it falls off the edge and ends up in landfill, but a circular economy. So I think that's really, really exciting for organizations to really explore the journey of the product. And of course, then the marketeers, when all that hard work is done, then it comes to telling the story in a digestible and compelling way as well.
And
I think really the core, just to go back to the point I made earlier about brands and their responsibility, I think it is about going deep, you know. So the responsibility for me actually would really start with understanding, going really deep within all of the departments in your organization and making sure that there's a level of understanding that's acceptable, that the world and young people expect you to have when you're operating at the level that you're operating at. And then, yeah, I think there's huge optimism. I certainly, from my own personal journey, working in the coalface with brands and with clients, there's a huge appetite there. Don't forget, these are all humans. These are people who want to go home and have a chat to their kids and their family and not regret what they've spent the last 20, 30 years doing. And does that require transformation? Does that require relearning, skilling up? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what it's all about.
Without a doubt, and you've put it really, really, really nicely. And definitely the notion of the journey of the product, I think it's one that we need to talk more around it. And, you know, you mentioned some brands like Patagonia, and I think they're exceptional, and it's how to make it more mainstream. That's the challenge ahead for these brands. Thanks, Jane. Adam, can I come to you now? And you probably raised your eyebrows a few times. A few weeks ago, the OECD launched a report around disability in Ireland, and sadly, we were very bottom of the list, especially when it came to employment of people with disabilities. So I think that just tells us what the challenges ahead for everybody, and that this is systemic change. Now, you're saying earlier, you know, this has to become a little bit like the climate conversation, must happen. What sort of radical change or different approach would you like to see when it comes to employment? I think you made a really good analogy around the consumers and consumers feeling reflected, otherwise they won't shop. Fair enough. What should we do about employment, Adam?
I think that report was fairly damning, and unfortunately it's not an outlier. This is something we've known for a while now. Ireland has the lowest rate of disability employment in the European Union. I think there's a few things that we need to think very radically about when we talk about this, because first and foremost, I think it comes to the very heart of how we see people with disabilities in Irish society. What I found quite interesting during the course of the COVID-19 pandemic is it slightly gave us an insight, I think, to maybe how ableist society really is without even realizing it. Because, you know, during the course of the pandemic, we saw queries to our organization increase by 280%. Obviously, the loss of routine and structure, close of vital support services, people were really struggling. But what I found so interesting was, you know, I was listening to the radio every day, like I'm sure everyone was, and I was hearing, is the PUP payment enough? Can people live on 350 euros a week? Is that acceptable? I was hearing about people talking about losing work and being worried about their job. I was hearing people talk about being isolated, not having everything to do every day. And these are all normal experiences for our community. And I think as we reopen society, if we know what that feels like, if people have had the chance to empathize with that, we need to realize that nobody should feel like that. And unfortunately, that is a norm for too many people with disabilities. What I think there's a reality is we have to begin with what is employment about? Because when we talk about disability employment, very quickly, we often get into a discussion about so we can get everybody with a disability into the workplace and no longer dependent on social welfare. There are many, many people with disabilities who will never be able to work to an extent that they are not going to require support from the state. But employment, we all know, is so much more than the paycheck we get at the end of the month. It's the dignity, it's the sense of belonging, it's having a purpose to your day, it's being able to use your talents and abilities. So we need to think not just about the people within the disability community who can work full-time or part-time. We need to think about that person in rural Ireland who could work 10 hours a week. We need to think about that person who can't travel more than maybe 15 minutes from their home because they don't drive and they find public transport challenging. So we really, really need to question what is employment and what are we trying to achieve. But I think more fundamentally, because this event is about sustainability, what I think we need to challenge ourselves, businesses and advocacy organizations, is how do we sustainably change this issue? Because I think what's happening at the moment is many businesses are doing great things. And I know there's businesses on this call who are already hiring people, who have set targets within their workplace for disability employment. But what I'm interested in is how do we move beyond the inspirational stories, and how do we actually get it to a point where when somebody with a disability finishes school, both the state and business expect that that person will want to work and want to tap into that ability. I think there's a reality at the moment that there's a lot of dependency. Business outsources this to organizations like ourselves to hire 1 or 2 people, but never develops the skills to actually do it themselves. So absolutely, it's great that there's a need to have targeted opportunities for people with disabilities, but we need to change how the interview process works. We need to change how employee assistance works. We need to utilize things like remote working, which presents huge opportunities for the autism community in particular. So what I think we need to do is, instead of just having a kind of cliental relationship between charities and business on this issue, we need to build the capacity of HR departments to lead on this and to manage this themselves into the future. What I think is interesting is there is a disconnect at the moment. So we did a big report with Irish Jobs in April called Autism in the Workplace. And what it showed is there's still huge barriers. 80% of autistic people believe their diagnosis would make it challenging for them to get a job. Really challenging, 75% of autistic people wouldn't tell their employer that they are autistic. And yet 56% of businesses finding they can't get the talent that they want. And 3/4 of businesses feeling that an autistic person would have something to add. So I think there's a will there, but it's different to the reality on the ground. So I think education is key, but I think critically capacity building is what's vital here.
Absolutely, no, without a doubt, and I'll steal your phrase, Adam. We need to sustain the sustainability change. That's exactly what we need to do. And you're talking about the recruitment challenge, but it's also then retention. It's not just about entry-level jobs, and I think that's something that both your organization and ours is very keen on seeing more of that progression, which is what everybody is looking for. And back to Jane's closing comment earlier about people want to go home with a sense of pride for what they've done. I think that's what's bringing the two of you in terms of your interventions together. So I am going to bring this conversation to a close by thanking both of you, Jane, Adam, and applaud the work that you're doing, because it is very inspirational, and it's very much what we need to see in terms of the revolution that we want to see happening. So thank you both, and hopefully we'll talk again soon and see more of this evolution.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you so much.
I think a revolution is happening for sure.
Excellent. Thanks, Jane. That's the line I needed to bring this to a close. Then I'm going to just finish once and for all this 3-day series of conversations, and I just want to do a very, very quick summary. And we've heard a lot, and I sincerely hope that it has been useful in terms of making some of the businesses over the last 3 days reflect on the road ahead. Please don't get stuck on whether it's a revolution or a transformation. Use the word that feels comfortable to you, but understand that the forces that are coming against are real, and that the change is happening. And back to the EY survey we mentioned on Tuesday that was talking about compliance being the main driver for sustainability. Maybe we need to start thinking differently. This is about your competitive advantage. This is about your opportunity to grow as a business in a sustainable way. And as Adam said, we need to make this change very, very sustainable. So I think what are the ingredients of this revolution? And we've touched on them over the last 3 days. The first one is leadership. The second one, so we need leaders that truly understand the change that's ahead. The secondly is we need a roadmap, and that's part of the discussion we had yesterday. And my colleague Johnny Meeham clearly spoke about some of the key changes that businesses need to confront with. And the third one, which has come up very clearly today, is dialogue, and it's that need to engage beyond the four walls of our company, because otherwise this change is not going to go anywhere. So what is the call to action from business in the community? So the first one is this notion, and I'll stop using jargon in 1 second, just bear with me. This notion that change has to be systemic, and this is exactly what every speaker has been saying over the last few days. It's not just about changing your company or your own practices. Think about modern slavery and the challenges we saw ahead of that, the consumer revolution, understanding how consumers feel, the inclusion agenda and the need to tackle inequality. So the change has to happen across your sector, across your industry, across your supply chain. No, it's not enough that you just change within your organization. The second one is this change has to be research and evidence-based. And I'm delighted to let you know today that with the 9 sponsors of this revolution, next year we're going to be commissioning some landmark research that will help to further understand how we sustain this revolution and how we make it really happen. So I'm very much looking forward to that, and I'll be very much looking forward to sharing that research with you. Final thing, and I'm going to stop here. If there's one thing I would like you to take away from this last 3 days that has come up loud and clear to me, is leave no one behind. That has to be the absolute requirement for any business that it's seriously looking at its strategy for years to come, at its product development or its innovation, at how it's going to sustain itself, is leave no one behind. And this applies to inequality as much as it applies to making your business sustainably and playing a key role in the climate and nature emergency that we face. It's a fundamental one. So final thing to say is thank you. Thank you to the audience for being with us over the last 3 days. I want to thank my colleague Lorraine Wall, who has played an incredible role in making this happening, and colleagues throughout a business in the community. It's been an absolute pleasure. Very much looking forward to further conversations and to keeping this revolution happening and taking place. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you very much. Goodbye.